What's up? What's up? It's your man Sean P coming in live. This is the Sean P Experience. I have a very special show lined up for you guys tonight, man. If you don't know, if you're new to the channel, I am Sean Polador, aka Sean P. This is Sitting with the Griots, where I bring in authors, filmmakers, illustrators, and creators talking about their process and what makes them tick behind the scenes, right? Today we have a very amazing guest. We have the Pulitzer Prize winner, Robert Samuels here, talking about his book. His name is George Floyd. How you doing, my man? How you doing? Good evening.
I'm super well. It's nice to see you. Nice to meet
Yes,
you in
sir. Yes,
person.
sir. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Let me give you your official introduction, and then we'll get into the show. All right. I have today Robert Samuels, was a staff writer for the New Yorker. Previously, Samuels worked as a national enterprise reporter for the Washington Post, focusing on politics, policy, and the changing American identity. He also served as the Post's chief analyst for Figurescape. Samuels is also co-author of His Name is George Floyd, One Man's Life and the Struggle for Racial Justice, the winner of the 2023 Pulitzer Prize in General Nonfiction and a finalist for the 2022 National Book Award for Nonfiction. He has also been a finalist for the Toner Prize for Excellence in National Political Reporting and the Livingston Award for Young Journalists. He has won Polk, Peabody, and NABJ awards. This is Robert Samuels.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, with you, I have a very special first question. I love asking any award winner this kind of a question. I saw the video you posted a couple of days ago. The video for the Pulitzer Prize. Y'all all waiting for the announcement, everything, the pandemonium. Give me your real emotions and thoughts whenever you realize that you were a Pulitzer Prize winner. Give me your true emotions.
Oh my gosh. It was overwhelming, and it was also the moment I've been waiting for. I've wanted to be a writer ever since I was a little boy, and being the Pulitzer Prize was my biggest dream. And it felt both like this tremendous amount of excitement on side, and also this burden that was kind of lifted off me in this like kind of strange way, because it had been something that I had wanted for so long. And then, as I settled down with it, what kind of stood out to me most was how, if I had the choice between winning the award and bringing George Floyd back to life, I would bring George Floyd back to life. And that, the most important thing was not simply that I had fulfilled my life dream, but it added legitimacy to a work that my co-author Tilda Ranipa and I felt was really important to put out to the world.
The minute you said the word burden, my mind went into a different aspect. I'm thinking about MLK whenever he won the Pulitzer Prize. In the book King, they talked about whenever he won, it was like getting more of a burden. Like, oh man, now
Yeah.
I gotta live up to this crazy expectation, like almost like a mythical thing that I can't even fulfill. So I mean, it's kind of recent for you. Do you feel any kind of sense of that just yet? Like the next project is
No.
like, well, you Pulitzer Prize winner.
I was actually talking to Tolu today about how nervous I felt about starting on a second book because, like the sophomore slump is real, and a lot of authors, they don't have their second book as big as the first. But, I mostly think to myself that I can't believe this actually happened to me. Like that some days I wake up and I'm like, oh wait, what if I'm actually living in a dream and someone's gonna call and say, actually we take it back, but it's too late. They can't take it back. It's in my house. It's there. And I mean, so that's the true feeling. And anything that happens after that, it's just sort of gravy on the cake. The work's already done. It's already out there.
Yes, sir. I love asking that question because the literature world, it seems almost like golf or tennis. Like whenever something good happens, everybody just kind of like, it's not like basketball or football and this big expressive emotion. It's
Yeah.
almost, that's why I want the author's real feelings versus what we see in the public, like how you really felt about it at your house, like.
Oh, I mean, I freaked out. I legitimately freaked out, and I was told a little bit in advance that it was happening, and I was, I was in my room, and my partner heard all the noise, and then wondered what was happening, and I was on the phone and sort of like mouthing that that we had won, and I cannot. It's hard to really express like the mixture of surprise, jubilation, and expression that all showered over me all at once. And I've never been so happy that I cried. And there was like one point where I was just uh I was happy so much that I was laughing and tears started coming down my eyes. Because I mean I couldn't believe it.
Thank you very, very much for that transparency, man. I appreciate the inside look because a lot of us writers and aspiring writers, like that's the Mount Everest. You're looking towards
Yeah.
the peak, and you guys have done it. So it's good for us to hear how that really, really feels.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a great feeling. It's a great
Yes,
feeling.
sir. Yes, sir. You mentioned being a writer since you were a young boy. I want to ask you a very important question. In your acknowledgments, you mentioned your fourth grade teacher.
Yeah.
So on my show, I love to always highlight the importance of educators, librarians, and other people in the community that might not get as much shine as they should. Tell us about your fourth grade teacher and the impact that they had on you.
Sure. My fourth grade teacher was Mrs. Lorraine Lindahl. And Mrs. Lindahl, she had come to our class late. She started the year late. And all of us, we were kids. I grew up in the Bronx. And all of us had been what we now call magnet programs, but they had taken us from our local schools and put us all in one big school. And none of us were really happy because we had missed our old friends and everything. And there was a teacher who tried hard, but just really wasn't up to dealing with all the emotions. And Mrs. Lindahl came and she just kind of like settled everything down. And she was, I think, I'd always liked to read, but she was the first teacher who kind of taught me that the importance of reading isn't necessarily about like whether or not you like the work. Like it's about the things you learn, how you learn to use your brain. And then she would ask us, and we had done a book of Aesop's fables, and she was like, choose fables on this, and you had to write 3 paragraphs, and I'd come in and I'd write 10 pages, and she would read them and mark them up, and say, give me things of improvement, and say like, you can actually kind of do this. And it was exciting to me because I had never known a writer. I had never known that it was something that you could actually do. Like when you're a child, you see jobs really as the jobs that are in front of you as being possible. And she made it feel like it was possible. But most of all, I mean, she encouraged me, and whenever I would do sort of like these tiny novellas after school that would be like 50 pages on wide rolled paper, and she would read them and really encourage me. And I still keep in touch with her. um, and I remember her saying, uh, when you write your first book, you have to promise you dedicate it to me. And I remembered that, and I felt it was really important to keep my promise. The other important thing that she did that I didn't really realize until later was that she I had mentioned once about how had really wanted to get a computer for my house, a personal computer. And my parents had said, you can get one if you get, perfect scores on your report card. And like every marking period, I got a little closer and closer. And on the last marking, I don't know, I'm crying, but on the last marking period, I got perfect scores, and they got me they got me the computer, and I remember looking at the report card and looking at her and being like, oh my gosh. And she opened up her arms and she gave me this hug. And it was the first time I ever touched a teacher before. And sort of like that love and that warmth, it's just unbelievable.
And this is why it's important to highlight this in the show because
Yeah.
I'm always harping on reading the whole book, right? The acknowledgments, the author notes, the end notes. Like a lot of readers skip those parts. Like, okay, yeah, whatever. Like a moment like that in that sentence, it might have been a sentence in the book, but
Yeah.
that loaded story you just gave, that was impactful. And I'm
Oh,
going to show any
thanks.
educator watching this that want to be encouraged. You know, you feel like I'm doing all this work. Why am I doing this? A story like what you just gave, that's the fire under the feet. Like, all right, another semester, let's do it. Let's keep it going. It is
Yeah,
important.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like I wrote in the book, I grew up in Title I schools in the Bronx. uh, I was magnetized, so people had higher hopes for us. But all of my friends from that point, they're living lives that they could not imagine. And I'm saying that because they hadn't seen anyone live lives like that before. And so I've always felt really grateful that I had really encouraging, dedicated teachers. It's made the hugest difference in my life.
Wow, wow. Thank you very, very much for that compelling story. Right. So let's talk
Yeah.
about you mentioned your co-writer, your co-author,
Mhm.
Tolu Olaranupe. How's that? How's that?
Close.
Close.
Tolu Olorunipa. It's
Olaranupe. I tried for days. I
yeah,
just tried it for day and
yeah.
night. I did the whole interview. The main thing is his name. The whole 4 days trying to get that right. Salute. Right.
Yeah.
But no. Tell us about the impact he had on you as far as your process and your journalism. How did he improve what you're doing on the page?
Yeah, so I wish Tolu could be here. He's great. He's the White House bureau chief of the Washington Post, and I can tell you they don't often White House bureau chiefs often don't look like Tolu. He's a tall, lanky, dark-skinned black man with an afro. But Tolu and I, we kind of come from. First of all, we both got our starts full time together. We were both reporters together at the Miami Herald when we were very young. And when I joined the Washington Post and joined the politics staff, they kept on asking me for people of color to hire. And I kept on saying, Tolu's the guy. But Tolu, he and I, we sort of have very complementary skill sets. Tolu, he writes really fast. He's very into sort of research. He writes with a lot of big picture perspective, whereas my background as a journalist is in what we would call immersive writing or narrative writing, where I'm with a subject for long periods of time, which means I write very long. I tend to sort of see the trees more than the forest, and Tolu seems the forest more than the trees. And so that means that, when we got together, we knew we'd be able to do something robust because he would see things that I wouldn't see. Um, the other thing, especially like in a book like this that has a lot of emotion and can be really heavy at times, it was good to have someone who you were working with, who you liked and respected, and who you could talk about. Um, Man, this interview was really hard, and I need to take a break. Can you pick this? Can you pick up this part of it because I'm emotionally spent right now? And we kind of like fed off each other like that throughout the entire process.
So whenever you're co-author on the project, how did you decide who was writing what part? I was curious
Yeah,
about it. How did y'all decide?
yeah.
Well, you take this, I'm gonna take this, or vice. How did y'all decide?
It's pretty organic. So when and it's funny because I used to always like when I'd read about people who wrote like music together, people would always ask what comes first, the music or the lyrics. And sometimes it like comes together both. What we did was we created a really detailed outline, which was essentially the book proposal. And we both kind of agreed on that outline that sort of went paragraph by paragraph of what we're going to do. And then we sort of worked on filling in those paragraphs. And what helped was during the pandemic, Tolu had family in Texas, and I had essentially moved to Minneapolis. So he was talking to a lot of people in Texas. I was talking to a lot of people in Minneapolis. And, there are parts where, like they naturally cohere. That's not to say he wrote the parts in Texas and I wrote the parts in Minneapolis. We both worked on all of the chapters together. But if I'd heard something, I'd ask Tolu, he'd chase it down in Texas. If he heard something, I'd chase it down in Minneapolis. And so that's really how we did it.
Okay, so for your first book, out of all the subject matters you could possibly write about, you got a lot of skills. Why did you choose George Floyd to tackle that enormous project? Probably one of the most historic moments in our current recent times. That case impacted the world. The whole world saw it. That's a pretty tall order. Why that choice?
Yeah. And I got to tell you, Sean, it's more that the topic chose me. And I know that's a sort of strange thing to say, but when the pandemic hit and it was clear that we were not going to be able to go to work for more than 2 weeks, I put together a list of things that I wanted to do during the pandemic. And one of them was finish a book proposal. And I had been working for it on a book proposal off and on for a couple of years that I was going to hope was going to be my first book. And then in May 2020, George Floyd gets murdered. And my first instinct was actually not to write about it because I didn't know what was going to happen. Well, I did not anticipate what was going to happen, but I thought I knew what was going to happen, which is people are going to be upset for a couple of days and then everyone's going to move on, that people would try to malign the person. And so I first started talking to white women in Oklahoma who couldn't move on, and like seeing that video was changing their life and they were trying to learn to be woke and not be Karens. And so I spent time with them. And I began to realize that there was something about this particular moment that could have a really important stamp on the world. So, like, I was called into a meeting at the Washington Post where our editor, Stephen Ginsburg, had said that they were going to bypass doing the profile of George Floyd. And what that means is typically, like when a person dies like George Floyd does, there's kind of a really not so great profile that runs in the newspaper, and it doesn't have anyone who's sometimes close. It goes through their criminal record. And he said, we don't need to do that. Let's think of something else. And we came up with this idea that what if we can look at different institutions, since everyone was talking about systemic racism, and try to figure out if we followed a life, how systemic racism would impact that life. And we were thinking, who could we write it about? And I think it was Tolu who suggested, why don't we just try it with George Floyd? And that was the beginning. And so we started with the project there. And then when I went out and started working on it, I was responsible for documenting his time in Minneapolis. I just kept on hearing so many things about him that I liked and were interesting. And like, it was super clear to me that he was a man who really had an impact on people. Like, not in the way if you ask someone who did not have a good reputation on the street and they say, oh yeah, he was a nice guy. The reasons were specific, they were loving, and even more so that when you looked at the course of his life, you saw this like optimism that could not be mitigated. He was like constantly trying, and every time he was trying, he was bucking up against some of these institutional racist practices that we had read about and some professor had told us about or something like that. And so when the project was done, I just really wanted to write more about him so people could really understand this stuff, that systemic racism wasn't kind of like an academic thing or something you talk about with your friends, that like it has a true impact on your life. And so that's why I say the book called to me, because I didn't feel that I was in the right position to tell it. But it turned out that, and I think, totally feels the same way too, that all of the lessons that we had learned, both over the course of our lives as Black men and over the course of our reporting lives, had prepared us for telling this story.
Wow. Thank you very. Wow, that was powerful. That was powerful. You mentioned having other proposals prior to this. Was there like
Yeah.
any other topics you can talk about? Like, just give us an idea of what some of those things were.
Oh, I don't think I can say just yet. Um, but yeah, I had two book proposals that were
Okay,
on the
hey,
go.
I gotta try. I gotta try. I gotta try.
Yeah.
I gotta do my job. I gotta try.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, no.
yeah.
Listen, no one's gonna understand it more than I understand it.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This book had over 500 notes. You guys did hundreds of hours of interviews, boots on the ground, like really in the places he was residing. You guys were there with the family, a lot of close encounters. Um, what was it like to research somebody that was such recent history? Most times covering books like this, the person's been going 50 to 100 years, and it's like a very past thing. This is very recent history. What was it like doing that research process for you guys?
yeah, so I think there are parts of it that helped make it easier because the recollections that people had were fresh in their memory. And typically with like biographies, right? You don't um it's of a person who is very famous, so they have lots of newspaper clippings and maybe other books have been written about them. There are lots of videos on them. George Floyd didn't have any of that. And so it was really important for us to be able to talk to people who knew him and they could sort of immediately do some things. And a lot of times, the process that we use to fact check is the same thing we do as journalists. Like the person had to have direct knowledge, and it's hard to do that when the main person that you're writing about's not there, or it has to be collaborated with people who had independent knowledge. And a lot of times, I would be talking to someone in Minneapolis, totally would be talking to someone in Houston, and they'd be telling the same story, and they would recount what George Floyd was saying almost to the word. Like, and the good thing about, I mean, this is just kind of how, Black communities, particularly impoverished Black communities, are. Like, people like telling stories and they like doing impersonations of people. And so every time they talk about George Floyd, they do the same kind of facial expressions. They like close their eyes a little bit and they do the same kind of posture. And that made us feel really confident in what we're doing. And I think it's because we were able to do it so recently that we were able to do that. The hard part was that the hard emotions are still real and still very present, right? So when I first started meeting the family and other people he was close with, his friends, and had spent time with them, like they didn't know anything about what was going on in the future. They didn't know whether Derek Chauvin was going to be convicted. They didn't know whether Donald Trump would still be the president. They didn't know any of that stuff. And so we lived a lot of that with them. And so, there'd be times where I'd just sit and I'd watch them staring at a window or starting to shake and sort of like trying to really come to terms with not just what had happened in the past, but what was going to happen in the future. And that was really hard. Watching the video was hard, but um, living with people with that much uncertainty, with that much guilt, with that much hope, with like that was a really tough spot.
Now, of course, everything can't make it into the book. You got to cut. the cutting room floor is a real thing. You got to trim this stuff down. Can you tell us about one thing that's not in the book that you wish in hindsight, like, man, if I could have put this one thing in the book?
Oh man, there are so many. Let me think about this. There are some things that we couldn't confirm in time. That there were some, there are some things in George Floyd's criminal past that we had strong implications that he was wrongly implicated, and we had a sense of who the person might actually be, and we couldn't confirm it, which was kind of very frustrating at the time. But like a lot of some of the anecdotes, we just couldn't use because we couldn't figure out how to do it. My favorite one was of George Floyd. He played basketball, and he had a nephew who he was like a father to, named Brandon. And Brandon was on the basketball team, and George Floyd is watching him play, and the team is up by like 50 points, and Brandon gets the ball, and he misses on a fast break, and he misses a layup, and he goes, "Oh, it doesn't really matter." And George Floyd got really upset at him and said to him, like, when you get an easy layup in life, you can't miss it. And he went out in the morning with him, and Brandon couldn't do anything else for the day until he made 50 layups in a row. And I just thought that was like a really good distillation of who the man was and how he thought about life. But we could never figure out a way to do it.
I mean, just based on everything else in the book and the way he was with children specifically,
Yeah.
he was definitely like this, this nurturing, all about children kind of person, from what I gathered, what you have in the book. So that would have been an
Yeah.
awesome part to add into the book. And for the audience to realize this, in these sport moments, y'all mentioned these football games, the basketball games, you are very detailed in the plays, and it's very visual when you read it. You can see the play happening. So that would have been a pretty cool moment in the book.
Yeah. I wish we tried maybe like 4 different spots to put it in, but it never felt just right. Um, and we thought, well, we have a lot of sports in it, so
Yeah.
people won't really
Well,
know the difference. They'll
I
get the
know
point. But I just love that anecdote. Yeah.
I know sometimes with books, like when time goes by, they have like a updated version or an extended version or all kind of remixes. Do you guys anticipate like maybe adding on some stuff, or it's pretty much like it's done, it's over with, leave it alone, it's finished?
No, I mean it's time. I mean, people have suggested that it might have been too soon to write about George Floyd, because I mean, I clearly disagree, but like their argument being that we don't really know how the history will settle with him and with his legacy. And I mean, I suppose that's true if you believe like times definitely end and new eras begin, but I don't really believe that. But I do think that over time, there'll be things that we'll want to add. And as the course changes, I would hope, like, I'm not a selfish guy, like, I would hope that there'd be many books about George Floyd, and that, like, there'll be different aspects to it that people will do. So, I don't think it's over by a long shot.
You just said the perfect answer, because one of my favorite writers, Dr. Imani Perry, she always
Hmm.
said when she did her book on Lorraine Hansberry, for an example, she said, I purposely left some things. I'm hoping somebody else will come behind me and write more
Yeah.
about this person. I'm not trying to write everything in the world about this person. I'm hoping somebody come in and write behind me. So what you saying that? I hope the
Yeah,
audience
yeah,
will
yeah.
absorb this.
I think it's really important. It's really important for the history and the culture. Like you were saying with the King biography. There are things that are now we can taste and understand about Dr. King that we probably couldn't understand 30 years ago. We didn't have the
Yeah,
same context. So,
right. In the case of the King book, I can't remember what year it is, but they're going to release all of these FBI files and things like that.
oh
So
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
that author about the same thing. Like, are you going to do like a remix? Are you going to add some more? I mean, the book is already a huge
yeah.
book. Are you going to add 50 more pages? Like, how you going to do it?
Yeah. I don't know what's gonna happen. But I think that's really important because history lives and breathes. And but the other thing about it, when we think about the timing of the book, is that if we didn't do it then, God knows what that historical record would look like. I mean, already you're seeing people trying to manipulate facts and distort information about the person's character. And so at least now we have it. And those who come after us will at least have what we did.
And once again, it's time sensitive because the hundreds of people you interview, I mean, who knows what life's gonna say if somebody's still here. And then people memory get like further and further. We start kind of improvising memories. So like to do it
Yeah.
sooner than later is vital in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
Let's take a little walk back in George Floyd, right? Matter of fact, let's go beyond George Floyd to his great grandfather. This part of the book really had me like blown away. So his
Mm.
great grandfather owned hundreds of acres of land out there in North Carolina, I believe, right after slavery. Tell us about his great grandfather and all of this land he had, and then that was taken from him. And just how it put the whole family on a different trajectory, like forever. That one
Yeah.
man, that one thing. I mean, it's systematic, right?
I mean that's sort of the very beginning of it. If you're going to look at a system, you have to start at the beginning. So what we did was we went back 7 generations and started with the first known emancipated person in George Floyd's line, whose name was Hillary Thomas Stewart. And Hillary Thomas Stewart could not read, but he was an incredibly industrious person. He was also very prolific at 22 kids, which meant he could farm a lot of land, and he was really good. He was really good at it. By the time Hillary Thomas Stewart was mid-age, he had amassed 500 acres of land, which would have made him one of the wealthiest landowners in North Carolina. Not just black landowners, wealthiest landowners, period. And within a generation, all that land was taken from him. And it was done through papers that he was forced to sign, predatory tax schemes, and all of that. And Hillary Thomas Stewart dies a pauper. And that leads the family to understand something about America. And that is, don't try to work so hard or too hard or stand out too much, because if you do, white people will take it from you. And after Hillary Thomas Stewart dies, it sort of leads the family to become sharecroppers and deal with the uh, really brutal practices of sharecropping, which meant that, they would do their part, but when it came time to get paid, something would always happen. And so, despite the fact that the family was never stopped working, like, I think people will sometimes see a person and have the stereotype that, oh, they come from a family that wasn't industrious, or if they just worked harder. Like George Floyd came from 7 generations at least of really hardworking people. And yet, none of them were able to get ahead in America because the economic structures that were set in place did not allow them to proceed. And more than that, more than the structures at place, it reified the message that uh, stay in your place if you want to live and you want to survive, because what our great grandfather went through was just too horrifying.
And we see right now, the past few years, a lot of us are focused on land ownership and acquiring land. It's a big focus on land, in recent times, man. So it's very good looking back at those past generations after slavery and how much land a lot of our families, especially in the South, a lot of our families own a ton of land that was taken through various means, man. It's crazy.
No, I mean it's crazy when you look at the numbers. I think 90 between 80 and 90% of the land that was owned by black people in 1910 is no longer their land. It's all been given away. And I mean it's hard. It's it's horrifying. and wasn't it wasn't given away because they sold it. It was stolen and it was taken. And I mean, I'm so glad Tolu led the research on that chapter and did such a fabulous job. And when we've talked about the book, especially in the South, we just sort of have to have these moments where we hold people and we allow them to tell their stories because it was so resonant. And the way it happened, it was something that for a long time we didn't talk about. Um, so George Floyd's family was unusual in that, this story had been passed down, but there's a lot of trauma about land that we're now just beginning to understand.
I say you being in the South, growing up here, you might just be chilling with somebody on the porch one day talking, and they'll point and they
Mhm.
say, "But you know that land over here, our family owned X, Y, and Z, and now it's a big casino there."
Yeah,
And this our
yeah,
generation, it sounds so preposterous, like man, like it's about just talking, like yeah, but like it's probably true.
yeah,
It's probably true. They're not just
yeah.
just talking, like they really, really have some land back.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, while this was coming out, I was at my in-laws, and my grandfather-in-law said, "Oh yeah, my family had some land in uh, land in Mississippi, and I don't know what happened to it." And I was like, "Really? Where?" And he had the papers. He just had them, and it wasn't like when I was looking at them, it was like right on the coast in Biloxi, where like now is a like sea coast hotels and all this stuff. And I mean, I couldn't believe it, and I
Yeah.
couldn't. I couldn't believe
Mhm.
how casual it was, how casually it was spoken. But it was probably something that he didn't realize either. Who knows the last time he was in Mississippi?
It's always spoken of like a fantasy or
Yeah,
like a fictional tale is the way in which it's said. It's always said
yeah,
like I mean, real matter of factly, if you're not paying attention, you might miss it
yeah,
about the land that we had, and the conversation just changed. Like that's
yeah.
how
Yeah,
fleeting it is.
yeah, yeah. But I think it's great that the conversations about it are changing too, right? Like, and I mean, so many of us are taught to believe that we didn't come from anything, and that, you know, a part of the reason, not the entire reason, but like it's kind of implied that our ancestors didn't have innovation, they didn't have genius, and that's why, black people, especially black people in this country, didn't get a lot. But then when you look at the records, George Floyd's great grandfather had innovation. He had genius. And it was just that the people around him, the white people, did not believe he should have it.
Because the minute I read that chapter, my mind has to go to the whole trajectory. Like, okay, if their family keeps all this land and everything that goes along with it, then the sharecropping doesn't happen. What happened to his mother doesn't happen. And like George Floyd isn't even in these particular places for these things to happen. He's not
Yeah,
even there, most likely,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I mean,
He's not
you
there.
can just look at the like history of tobacco in this country. Like that's what they planted, and the people who planted tobacco and own it, they built universities. They, have, and bear in mind, even if not, the people who had owned, who had, enslaved Hillary Thomas Stewart, they got to live lives where they became justices and judges and lawyers and politicians. And you can just see the diversion. Now, like, it's, I don't think economics is total destiny, but it would have changed so many things about his life. He wouldn't have, his mother wouldn't have had to flee North Carolina in search of a better life. And if he doesn't flee North Carolina to Texas, he doesn't have to flee Texas to Minnesota, and yeah, who knows what it would have looked like.
Like the more you read the fine details to the book, I mean, all of us saw the footage that day in May, and we all feel like, man, that could be any one of us, especially in the black male. But you
Mm.
start reading the fine details of all the parts of his life, that could really be any one of us. Like it
Yeah,
really can be. From the
yeah, yeah,
food to the housing to like so many systems that fail, that could be any one of us. or our family members easily.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but I have this scar on my, I'm proud to, I have this scar on my left hand, or my right hand that happened while we were on book tour. I was riding a scooter and I fell in and broke my arm. And, I went to the hospital and they didn't want to give me pain medication. Like my arm is snapped in two. And the I don't know what their title is, but the person who's supposed to administer the drugs says to me, "You don't seem like you're in that much pain. You seem pretty strong," which is based on these bankrupt stereotypes that had afflicted George Floyd, right? Like, the idea that you could be in a place and your arms dangling, and they're like, "Well, we don't really think you need anything stronger than
I
Tylenol."
cannot
I
believe
think
you just
tells the
said
tale.
that.
That was
Horrible.
2022, and so, I mean, yeah, these things have incredible resonance.
I try my best to be far away from my interviews as possible. I don't try to interject myself at all. But like, I was in the hospital with my grandfather a few months ago, and he's one of those old school, rugged, built forward, tough kind of guys. He's in
Yeah.
the bed. He's in the bed in pain. He's writhing in pain.
Mm,
It's like 2 in the morning.
mm,
I'm telling the nurse like he needs some pain med. And she
mm.
pretty much like, well, we get to it 40 minutes from now, and we'll get to it whenever. And on the pain scale of 1 to 10, like maybe it's a two. Like, no, if this man is saying he's in pain,
Yeah,
he's probably at a 20 if he's talking about
yeah,
pain. You
yeah,
don't
yeah,
complain about
yeah,
nothing, right? But
yeah,
they don't think
yeah,
we feel.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it's really hard.
It's crazy. Let's go down from that to the housing he grew up in Texas and the schools he attended in Texas. Let's talk about how many systems were already jacked up before Floyd even came there. Like you
Yeah,
guys
yeah,
do a good
yeah,
job of giving, you guys do a good job for the audience that's listening. You do a good job of painting the whole picture of the country and the politics of the time and what's going on racially before Floyd even comes to a place to understand what he's in, right? So, tell us why you made that particular writing choice. Tell us about that.
yeah. We were talking to a guy at Washington University in St. Louis, and we were trying to kind of understand the world in which George Floyd was inhabiting. And he was talking to me about this thing called John Henryism, which is kind of the fancy sociological term for what we say, you work twice as hard to get half as far, or you have to work twice as hard to get far in life. And what that does. And he put it that, at some point in your life, everything starts to pile up. Like all of that work you do to deal with racism that's casual begins to pile up, and it's bad for your health. It weathers you. In George Floyd's case, right, when he was in second grade, we spoke with his second grade teacher. And when he was in second grade, he was reading and writing at grade level, which in his community was pretty impressive. Not a lot of kids could do that. And he wrote this essay talking about how he wanted to be a Supreme Court justice because he had just learned about Thurgood Marshall. And it's not just like the essay, which was one paragraph. That was impressive. It's like the words were spelled right, the grammar was right, and he had all of these ingredients to fulfill what he wanted to do. And it was also true, right, that when people saw him tall, fast, lanky at the time, they were like, oh, no. Like, you don't need to study your books. You need to play football because that's what people who break out of this community do. And George Floyd believes them, right? And that's so he becomes a pretty good football player. But when it comes time for college, he can't meet the academic requirements because no one in his life had taught him that he needed to meet them. And so, he's being pinged around the system. He's living in a red line community. And what's waiting for him when college doesn't work out or the economics of the neighborhood, which is drugs. And, you know, desperate people do desperate things. And he becomes, not just uh, bad drug seller. Most people say, like, most people who knew George Floyd say he didn't have the ruthlessness to do it. He was too nice of a guy because if someone asks, you just give it to them. But he becomes a user, and he begins to try and find all of these ways to get out. Now, this is important. This is during the war on crime days in the late 1990s, early 1990s. But one of the facts that we discovered while writing the book that really stunned me was, if you talk to Joe Biden or people there who are in charge of, who had pushed forward this legislation for mass incarceration, they will tell you that yes, we did that, but we also put in more. We also put in money for programs like Boys and Girls Clubs and drug education and things that would help people from not get involved in those systems, money for counseling and stuff like that. But we actually went and looked at the allocations from Congress during those years. And when you looked at the allocations, they said they were going to spend the money, but they never spent the money. It wasn't there. And I think that shows a lot of the false promises that were given to these communities. And I mean, it just happened that at every turn when, we talk to a sociologist or a professor or an expert about these things, and they'd say, well, if George Floyd was alive, then these are probably some of the things that he might have dealt with. It just so happened that he had. And I mean, it was really revealing for me, but it really taught me just kind of how present and how pernicious these things are, because all of his life, the common thread was he wanted to be seen as an individual who would stand out by his own merit and his own innovation. And time after time, people see him as this big black guy and don't afford him the grace that is afforded to many people who do not look like him.
And whenever you say in the book, like he had like 20 plus police encounters and things like that, it made me really sit down and think to myself, how many police encounters have I had?
Yeah.
From high school to now, as a black man, how many encounters and things have I had? And not even being in the street life, not even trying that life.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
a
yeah,
regular guy going to work, going to the store, like just how many encounters. And it's a very startling number.
yeah. I couldn't even bring myself to count. But I mean, some of the police interactions were things like walking down the street looking like you have nowhere to go in particular, and how
I've
many
been stopped three
times.
times like that.
Yeah, yeah,
I've been
yeah,
stopped
yeah.
three times like that.
I
Surrounded by
mean, how
cars,
many?
guns
Yeah,
drawn, light on you, the whole nine. Just walking and
yeah,
talking
yeah,
like what?
yeah. I mean, when I remember in my own neighborhood, uh, walking to my home, having police called on me, and uh, them saying, "Are you sure you live here?" It's like, well, I am. Are you sure you live here? Because if you did, you would have known I live
Yeah,
here.
bro.
Um. So yeah. So I mean,
Man, you
all
are
those
killing
things
me.
are very real.
So my current job, I work very close with police and sheriffs and state troopers, and so it's a good time to talk to them. Off the whatever you having coffee, talking. Like whenever you guys ask us these line of questions, is there actually a wrong answer to these questions? Like, where am I going? I could be going anywhere. There's no wrong
Yeah.
answer to that question. Where you
Yeah.
coming from?
Yeah.
I hate these line of questions, man. It makes no sense.
Yeah. 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 That's right.
They're
There.
trying to
Yeah.
find a way to catch you up and to see how you gonna respond or act. They're doing so many psychological things trying to be slick with these questions. It's crazy.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
You know. Speaking of policing, let's go into Derek Chauvin, right? So the same
Hmm.
way you gave a whole genealogy of George Floyd, and I love that. You actually took the time and effort to do a genealogy of Derek Chauvin, showing this man whole the making of him. Tell me why that was important to lay that whole backstory out to Derek Chauvin.
Yeah, because I felt that if you're going to talk about systemic racism, you couldn't pretend that it only affects black people, right? The the impact of systemic racism is that white people, their minds are also shaped by these ideas, the breaks that they might be able to get, the grace that they're able to be given, will yield itself because of the color of their skin. And so that's why we wanted to do it. We just kind of wanted to test the hypothesis. And we tried, we made probably between 110 and 120 phone calls and interviews about Derek Chauvin specifically. A lot of people, with his friends and family and people he worked with, a lot of people didn't want to do it, but a few of them did, which was really thankful. And so, what we were able to find out was Derek Chauvin, his family came on boats freely. Um, and even though they started with nothing, they were able to build a middle class life for themselves. And Derek Chauvin was largely unremarkable in a lot of ways. He was a perfectly okay student. He was adrift when he graduated in high school and tried a bunch of things before going to the army and really um, liking the idea of being a hero. And before he meets George Floyd, there are at least 30 complaints that people had with him, oftentimes him disrespecting them. And we were able to find at least 8 other instances where he used a neck restraint. He tried to choke someone.
I was going to say that.
And
I was going to say
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. And you know, each time, and we spoke to some of the people who had witnessed it or had been in conversation with Derek Chauvin, and a lot of times he'd note that he was doing it because the person was bigger than him, and he was doing it because the police department had said it was an okay thing to do, so long as you don't kill a man, to put it in the most basic terms, right? But over time, you see Derek Chauvin becoming more and more bold in his policing. And the thing that I always note to people, Sean, is that when people who are, these cop watchers look at Derek Chauvin's criminal complaint record, it's not particularly outstanding. It's pretty run of the mill for a police officer in that precinct in Minnesota. But what I think that shows is that it wasn't that Derek Chauvin was just a bad apple, right? He was shaped and molded by a system that allowed him to be that way. That would not allow George Floyd to be his way. And I mean, the other thing that I think really became clear, and I was talking to Tolu and he said it the other day and reminded me, although it's in the pages, that after Derek Chauvin was arrested, it was found out that he owed tens of thousands of dollars in back taxes that he wasn't paying the government. And no one had said anything. George Floyd maybe owed $20 to a shop clerk, and he lost his life over it. And I think that is a really telling difference of how these things work in America, who gets grace and who doesn't get grace.
Man, that chapter on him is heavy, man.
Yeah.
This is so many near death moments. And the whole George Floyd thing could have happened way before George Floyd. This man was
Yeah.
just on the line, every time he could.
Yeah. One of the police chiefs had said to us that, you know, you have your bad officers, right? But those aren't the ones that really keep you up at night because they're going to be found out. But it's the officers like Chauvin who are really hard. The ones who I think her language is they put the handcuffs on a little too tight. The people who just kind of walk the line as far as they can to see what they can get away with. And that's definitely what Derek Chauvin was doing when he murdered George Floyd.
Now let's speak about the actual day that we all know about, right? In May. Now, you and I have been in conversation for months prior to this show, as we know. And we
Yeah.
finally knocked down the day and the time. I had no idea prior to that it was the 4 year anniversary and all
Mm,
that was this past, a couple of days ago. Um, the way you guys wrote that chapter of that scene, now prior to it, I have never watched the footage. I still have never seen
mm,
it. I made that choice myself not to watch it for my own
yeah.
physical sake. But you guys write that scene in so much detail. It's so
Yeah.
vivid. And I had the audio book too. So your audio narrator did such a good job conveying how scared he was and the fear, the anxiety. He's so, like not knowing what's going on. Like he captured that to where I felt a whole lot in that chapter.
Mm, mm.
What was it like writing that chapter?
It was really hard. Uh, like you, neither Tolu nor I had watched the video um, until we started writing the book, and um, I. It's not completely true. I had watched the video when it was played during the trial, but that was my first interaction with it. And of course, at the trial, saw it all from all different angles and with sound and without sound and with animation, without animation. And, there were times when we were recounting the actual scenes where we had to, pause, count to ourselves how many times we heard him say "mama" or "I can't breathe" and things like that. It's really, really tough work. Um, and so we thought a lot about like how to do it and how to not make the reader feel like they're suffocating in sadness. And we came up with the idea that like there were points where we needed to step out and we needed to remind people of the life that was being lost and interject these anecdotes of him driving in the car and him having dreams of opening up a restaurant. So you had a little bit of a release valve, so you just want to see like just pain after pain after pain. And then fortunately we got the opportunity to speak with some of the witnesses, some of whom testified, and people who were with George Floyd that day who had not testified, but they were willing to talk with us about what they remembered and what he was doing before all of that happened. When it was just a day he was gonna barbecue and maybe see a girl, and that was it. And I think knowing all of that stuff like kind of helped deepen the sadness because or not the sadness, but it helped deepen the sense of what was lost, right? Because you're able to see this man on a day he did not know he was going to die. And you are able to see people who um, who were just going about their lives and then they're encountered with it. And it made you really understand kind of like the spontaneous cruelty that was given to the world that day. Um, One of the poems that I really liked growing up was a poem by W.H. Auden called Musée des Beaux-Arts. And I think about it a lot when I'm writing. And it starts by saying, about suffering, the old masters were never wrong. They understood the human position of it. And then it goes to describe a painting of Icarus by Bruegel. And so you see, a man falling from the sun and just horses and children playing. And we wanted to make sure that we had that too. Like we had that sense that Auden was describing, that even when this sort of tragedy was happening, right, there was a woman who was eating an ice cream cone and was just curious about what was happening. There was the neighborhood busybody who was there because he was a busybody. And of course, there was Darnella Frazier, the 16-year-old girl who took the recording that everyone had seen, who started the day with an annoying cousin who just wanted to go get some candy with some money she got, right? And like I think when you sort of put it in that context, when you're just not focused on just the pain and George Floyd screaming, you really get the sense of the context of what it meant.
I'm telling you, you guys did some masterful writing in that chapter, even giving the backstory of the witnesses.
Yeah, yeah,
Like not
yeah.
just this guy said this, like giving the backstory of those people. It really set this whole panoramic, like this scene, and it was just
Oh, thanks, thanks. And
masterful.
like, thanks. And like you said, anytime we can shout out Dion Graham, who narrated our audiobook, we just have to do it.
Yeah,
Because
he was
he
amazing.
was, I mean, it is a stunning, stunning reading of the work. And even though, like, Tola and I put the words together, um, Dion was able to find nuances that we didn't think of, and there are points where like every writer has their own music and their own rhythm, and your own kind of desire of like, man, if someone read it, I hope they read it like this. And we didn't Dion. We spoke to him and we asked if he needed any help, and he goes, "No, I think I got it." And so many of the cadences that were important to me, he just kind of understood. He's such a intuitive reader. I mean, and it's really fun. I mean, it was a wonder.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll ever see this video or not, but I want to give him his props right now because before the George Floyd book, I had heard various books that he narrated. I love his voice and what he does. He is an incredible audio.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He
He's
puts he
amazing.
puts his he puts his foot in it. I can't. Yeah.
He does. So let's fast forward a little bit, right? So you had an article recently in the Washington Post about your feelings 4 years later. So give us some of your thoughts about okay, 4 years later, are we have we gone forward as a nation, as a country? All the folks that was out there protesting and busting down doors and everything, things have kind of dissipated or whatever, and lawmakers are doing what lawmakers do. What's your thoughts 4 years later?
Yeah. That piece was probably the most personal thing to what I have ever written. Because not only do we speak with some folks who we had spoken with before, and folks who were newly interested in, and what I really wanted to understand, and what people have often asked me, is how to put things in context. Like, how does this moment that was so great and so massive dwindle like this to, the books that when we were writing the book, everyone was saying everyone should read, suddenly became the books people were saying you should never read. And you're seeing the kind of like retrenchment of diversity officers talking about inclusion, people are afraid of wokeness, people being afraid of CRT, and it really makes you feel like maybe maybe this country can't do it. Like maybe this might be the best we got. And what I was continually reaffirmed by were from people who really had the most at stake, like the people on the ground, the people who were able to make the loss, the people who didn't have privilege. They didn't have the privilege of pondering this question. They only had the privilege of like doing the work to help make the country be better for themselves, and if not themselves, their children. While we were writing this book, my partner and I had a pregnancy loss, and Tolu had a baby, a little black boy. And I think it really weighed on us the type of world that we were going to hand to them. And, like a part of the reason why I thought the book was important was to help people try to hand to these next generation, if not us, a better world than the one we had. Certainly a better one than the one that George Floyd had. And when people ask, I often say what I've learned is that pessimism is the ultimate American privilege. Like, it is a feeling that you can nothing might get better, and you can be comfortable with that feeling because things are pretty okay for you. But if you're in the America in which things are really not okay, that you're not sure about whether you're going to live for tomorrow, um, that's not something we can give away. That's what I relabeled the last chapter of the book, American Hope, which is not a phrase anyone had said to us explicitly. But when we're thinking about all the systemic issues that came from George Floyd's life, one thing that seemed so clear was that there was this like resilience that continued to happen with people who should have little hope. They had the most hope. And because of that, they are the carriers of hope in this country and the only thing that can really change the ways things are. And so when I think about it 4 years later, I think mostly about like, all right, if you're not doing the work, can you start doing some work? Like, are you actively helping to make the world better? Because we still have a chance to do it. George Floyd lost his chance. It was stolen from him, but we still have the chance.
So, man, you're right about that. So you've been years with this book as far as the writing process, and then when the book hits the shelf, now you're doing all these book talks like this. How do you decompress or detach? Right, like every book talk you
Yeah.
do is this heavy, deep topic every
Yeah.
time. So, like, how do
Yeah.
you take care of yourself? Is the question.
Um, I I have a few ways. I have a really wonderful support network. I have really good friends who the last thing that they want to hear about when I see them is sort of like what I did at work today, which is really helpful. But like, it's also one of the funny things is I went through three cell phones in the writing of this book, and all three of them were crushed by dumbbells at the gym. Because while I was writing, I started lifting weights, and like a part of it was like, well, George Floyd had a 100-pound bicep curl, so how close can I get to 100 pounds? Spoiler alert, not close. But it sort of like it allowed me to like do things that sort of kept my mind off everything, and it really helped. It really helped. But I also remind myself that like God, what an opportunity, and um, just sort of the ability to be able to go in and dig in and say what I've found and help people understand another life without having to live that life. It's a real privilege. And so I try not to lose sight of that. Like, I try not to wallow in sort of like my own heaviness about the topic. I instead try to delight in the fact that I'm able to speak this, and then I'm able to sort of like close my laptop and do something else, and that really seems like a privilege.
That's very much a privilege, right? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, for the young journalists out here, what's some advice you would give to like anybody like wanting to get into journalism or they're just starting journalism? What's something that you wish you knew before you started?
Uh, One is that there's always room to improve. And that's the thing that keeps me like excited about journalism. Like, the stories will change every day, and as you continue to grow, you'll continue to find new ways and new questions. And all of that is wonderful. And like the other thing, I think when I was super young and people would tell me I needed more experience, I would get really insulted by that, like, and say, well, you didn't tell this person that they needed more experience and all of that. And all of that's true. And it's also true that like I never thought about it in terms of life experience, and um that first day when you're out of college, and that first time you're out of college and you're not sure you balanced your book correctly, and the heartbreak that you have, and it's kind of your fault and you realize that it's your fault. All those things enrich you and sort of like allow you to have a sense of empathy that I just didn't have at 23. And I think it allows you, like, it allowed me to understand that, like, people don't have to be perfect in order to be meaningful, like, as my life became more imperfect. And so I think it's like really important to be able to say, all right, like, as you grow up, it's not experience, but you get to put your life in a different context. And when you have that different context, you can ask better questions, you can do more things. And I think that's really important. And the third thing is, like, just read a lot and find authors and and marvel at them and really sort of think about how they're able to do what they're going to do, how they're able to conjure up those sentences that you like count the words in sentences, count the
Mm-hmm.
sentences in paragraphs,
Yes, sir.
and try to get it, try to mimic it as much as you can without plagiarizing, because that's when you really find your voice. You need to find your voice. It's through, like, just kind of like not just reading, but like really analyzing what you
Really,
read.
yeah. I enjoy on your page a couple of days ago. I was scrolling back. You were showing like your bookshelf and some of the things you have been reading, and I really
Yeah.
enjoy seeing another writer have that many books. I know you're busy writing and you're on tour and it's a lot of things happening. So to see you read that much, that was impressive.
Yeah. Well, the thing about that I didn't know about having a book that people admire is you just get a lot of books. Like, you just you just get a lot of great free books, and it's lovely. Um, so we have this thing where, like, a random package comes and we're like, oh, it's probably a book, and it comes from someone who I know, and it's like, I'm trusting that it's going to be good. And then you get to meet all these other writers and you just kind of low-key in awe of them, and it just enriches everything. I mean, there are so many books that I've now read by people who I've met since this journey, and you can just see them in the work in ways that are just kind of exciting as a person who studies writing. Whereas before you'd be like, oh, good book, but like knowing Amani, like knowing Dr. Perry, and seeing how her mind works, and knowing that she's incredible at the cha-cha slide, like, it really changes the way you see, like, that opening with the quadrille in South to America. Like, it just makes everything so much more fun.
Wow. Thank you
And
very much for that, man. I want to ask you this question: when you've completed the book, what was the Floyd family response to the book? I love to ask
yeah,
that, if possible.
yeah. So the I don't know if they had read it. I don't think they did. And the reason I don't think they did is, one, they've been incredibly busy, but also, I mean, it traffics in some really hard topics. So I never write with the expectation that the people I write about will read it. Like, their job is not to read me. My job is to write about them. Uh, and I will also say that they they gave us an incredible opportunity, and they gave us that opportunity because they had either read the work we had done on the journey to the book, or people had told them that we were doing a really good job. And so, they understood everything. They're, it's a big family. We don't know all of them. But the ones that, we've maintained contact with, they're so thrilled when, it won the Pulitzer Prize. And um, I when I talk to them now, or when I have the chance to talk to them, I try not to talk about work, because I just think they really did something wonderful by giving us that much access and openness and vulnerability. And so when they want to engage, I'm there to engage with them. And when they don't want to, I respect that too. They did what they. I made a promise to them that I was going to work as hard as I can to make the world see their brother or their nephew or their uncle in the ways that they saw him. And, I'm glad that I was able to keep that promise.
No, I love that response because what you just said, you might just liberate a lot of other writers out there because in your mind it feels like I got to get this story so perfect because I don't want them to feel like, but they might not even read it. It's a real reality. Like they might not even see it. You try to
Yeah,
keep that
yeah.
pressure off. Like there's no need for all this. They might not even read it. To be honest, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like every writer needs to have a moment where they sort of ask themselves the question of, well, who am I doing this for? You know? And I do think that if your answer is I'm doing it for the person I'm writing about, you might want to choose a different topic, or you might, like want to write letters to them or something. But, what we talked to the Floyd family about was not about writing for them, like we were writing so the world could understand them. And that, what I asked was for them to join us in a process in which we could help dismantle systemic racism. That was the opportunity that they had. It wasn't about making them look good or feel good. I think, I think at the end they felt pretty good. I'd be really sad if they didn't feel that way. But the more important thing was that they felt like they were joining us in the work, not that we were working for them or opposed to them.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. As we come to a conclusion and bring this plane to the runway, my last question is: what are you working on currently, or what can we expect next? And
Yeah.
I don't want you to spill the beans, but if you could
No,
allude,
no, it's fine. It's
if you could
fine.
allude to some things.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm back to my old job. I've been really fascinated with just historic preservation, and so I'm working on some pieces looking at the efforts to preserve Black history, and it's been a really fulfilling project for me. So I'm working on that, and I'm doing some work in my own community too, in terms of telling stories from my own community, which I haven't done for 15 years. It's 15 years? No, that's not true. About 10 to 12 years. I've been traveling the country, um, talking about this crazy political time we're living in and how it affects our day-to-day lives. And all of that is good and important and necessary work. And it's also true that I feel like I've kind of lost touch with the soil in which I walk. Um, and so I'm really excited about doing some stories with some local people and exposing some of their issues.
But thank you very, very much for that, man. I look forward to anything you write in the future. You are an auto buy person, in my opinion. If I see your name, I'm going to get it. If anybody out there watching, if you haven't read the book, man, please go out there and get the book. Support the authors, man. Paperback, hardback, audio, all of it is amazing. And thanks for your time and all your attention and details today, man. Thank you very, very much for your effort. Thank you.
Thanks so much. This is a great interview. I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, you will. Shout out to the chat. Peace.